Tappe has just released Arc 7 Chapter 56, and this video will be a summary of the chapter. I highly recommend you check out my Arc 7 Chapter 55 summary. Also, I highly recommend you check out my Volume 29 interlude. So if you've only been reading the web novel, then you won't know this light novel exclusive content about what's happening in the city of Guaral with Madeline, so make sure you watch that video. Anyways, let's begin. The city is abandoned and the order of retreat is given. Yona has a tense look as she hears the order given by the man with the demon mask. Yona respected his decision. After all, it was most likely made to protect the inhabitants of the city, but despite that, Yona couldn't accept that decision. When Abel questions Yona on why, she states that Chaos Flame is the location for those of who, in the Empire, have no place to call home. However, Abel dismisses this as a stupid sentiment, causing Yona to call out his real name, Vincent Valakia. Abel reminds her to not call him that name, and further states that pleading for mercy will not change his mind. Yona states that the Empire's people are strong, and Abel confirms it. Vincent is the pinnacle of Valakia and wonders if Abel knows the true identity of the shadow. Therefore, Yona asks Abel if they really need to run from the shadow, and asks what it is. Abel responds that it's a great calamity. Yona is confused. Abel says the words really quietly, but the impact of the words were present. He was then asked again about what he meant by those words. Abel states that the shadows can endanger the Empire, and that the rays of the sun cannot penetrate the darkness, or so he heard from one of the stargazers. Abel continues, stating that if you look at the shadows, the words Abel heard was not an exaggeration. Yona feels bitter inside. After all, Abel heard this proclamation from a stargazer, then it meant that it has to be true, as stargazers are one of the customs of the Valakian Empire. Yona questions whether or not Abel will run away just on the basis of a poem chanted by a stargazer, and that running is not like the Valakian way. Abel says he cannot be swayed or provoked. Mid-conversation, Lewis started making sounds, interrupting Abel. It seemed like Lewis was getting agitated since their conversation had nothing to do with stopping the shadows. Abel asks Yona where the black-haired kid is. After all, if Lewis is present with Yona, then Subaru should be with her. Yona looked at Lewis, and Lewis was pointing at the shadows. Yona did not answer Abel, but Abel managed to piece it together and said, "I knew it." Abel said he didn't expect it, but there's no point in being possessed with a plan and not getting a result. Yona is confused, and Abel elaborates, they will retreat. There will be damage, but that can't be helped. Yona couldn't agree, but before she said anything, Lewis punched Abel whilst making sounds, and then she disappeared in a blink, constantly blinking towards the Great Calamity in the distance. Kathma is using his insects to keep the shadows at bay. Yona, seeing this, knew that the little girl didn't have a trump card. After all, if she did, she wouldn't have relied on Abel or herself. Yona asks if the flame of the Yang sword would be able to counter the shadows. Abel is still crouching, recoiling from the pain of the punch that Lewis gave him. Yona believes that Abel did deserve the punch, but only Abel can be the person to solve this situation. The Yang sword is a true holy sword and a magic sword. Its flame can even burn that great calamity. Abel, however, says he will not pull out his sword. Yona asks why Abel can accept that answer of not pulling out the Yang sword in this situation, stating that if the man with the mask was truly Vincent Valakia, then how can he accept that? With that, Yona grabs Abel by the collar. In the meantime, the Great Shadows continued. She did not know what Kathma or Lewis could do against the shadows, so she had to cooperate with Abel. Yona continues, if you are the Emperor, and Vincent again cuts her off, stating that he will not use the sword. Yona is filled with rage and she bares her fangs. She could easily bite his neck and kill him, but he was the Emperor of Wallachia. He was used to this murderous intention by those around him. Abel asks when Yona will understand. He will not go with her whims and ideals. Yona released Abel. Yona states that she cannot accept this order, and Abel states that she will lose everything if she doesn't run. Yona states that she loves the people of Chaos Flame, and the city means everything to her. She pulls out her pipe and she puffs out some smoke. This cloud of smoke splits into smaller pieces and goes to everyone in Chaos Flame. They then consume the smoke whilst proclaiming their love. All of the people who confess their love would be blessed by the soul marriage technique, and thus they had glowing, burning eyes. With that, Yona asks Abel to leave and states that she will not lose Chaos Flame. With that, she jumps away. The scene changes and we see Abel looking over the battlefield. Yona is attacking the shadow, throwing buildings at it. Abel wonders if their attacks are ineffective. However, Abel realizes that if Yona didn't use her Red Rory Castle to blow up the shadows initially, its momentum would have consumed everything. So her attacks can actually stall the shadows. Abel thinks of the person who foresaw the coming of the Great Calamity, but this person refused to be asked more about it. Either way, that person wasn't present. Maybe it would be best to think of the others who are in the same position. With that, Abel calls out the name of Subaru, but he's interrupted. We see that Abel and Tarita are back. In the background, we see Yona throwing buildings at the shadows. We also see Kathma using long-ranged attacks. However, Kathma, who uses insects, cannot use it infinitely as he will eventually run out of insects to use. The followers of Yona are dismantling buildings and then throwing them at the shadows. This is what Yona did before. When any army attacks Chaos Flame, she can use the city itself as a weapon. However, this wouldn't really work on this Great Calamity. Tarita could see that the shadows were getting larger. Tarita, when mentioning the shadows, calls it the Great Calamity, and Tarita and Medium question what should be done. However, Abel asks if Tarita will change things. Tarita is shocked. However, Abel questions why she knew that the shadows were known as the Great Calamity. Abel questions whether or not the stars told her how to escape destruction. Tarita is confused and crumples to the floor, and Abel calls her a fool. Abel asks if she regrets it. Medium is confused. Abel says it's obvious. After all, Tarita missed Abel with an arrow in the jungle. Tarita's colour drained from her face, and Abel continued with, "Will you answer your call now, hunter of the jungle, or should I call you this? A new stargazer who has inherited the destiny of preventing the Great Calamity." The scene changes. The world is crumbling and rumbling. Owl cannot cover his ears. After all, he only has one arm. He tried to escape. He was scared. "Why are you here?" Owl continues to mutter. Owl thinks to himself, if he acted with anyone else other than Subaru, this would not have happened. However, he had to get involved. Natsuki Subaru should not have broken down there. That's why he thought it was necessary. That's why he... However, Owl is cut off. Someone is calling him a crybaby. Owl turned around and saw Obart standing there laughing. Unfortunately, he couldn't clap his hands. After all, he was missing his right arm from the wrist onward. And with that, the chapter ends. So, there's a lot happening in this chapter which I'm trying to wrap my head around. And Tarita has this sort of destiny to avoid the Great Calamity. So, she missed her arrow shot on Vincent. Apparently, she was the hunter. So she was trying to kill Abel, but she missed him on purpose. So the question is why? Because I was speaking to people, and some people were saying that if Tarita killed Abel, then the Great Calamity would not have happened, because Abel would have died. That means Subaru would never have met Abel, and therefore, Abel wouldn't need to go to Chaos Flame or whatever. But they still speak as if Tarita can do something now. It seems like Tarita is supposed to be a stargazer as well. Like, I'm not too sure what's going on with Tarita. She seems to be someone who has importance. Not only that, Aldebaran has some insane stuff. He's saying that this is happening because he got involved with Subaru. He's saying that if he didn't get involved with Subaru, this wouldn't have happened. And at the same time, he said that he had to get involved because Subaru shouldn't have broken down there. I'm assuming he's referring to when Subaru was banging his head against the wall after Rem said, "You are not a hero." I'm assuming that's what he's referring to. So it's like Al's supposed to know what is supposed to happen. I can't tell if... I mean, because that's like the whole theory about Al. Like, Al knows exactly what's going to happen, but he reset his territory, and he went back like 10 years. And that's the reason why he's sort of seeing what should be happening, and he can notice the differences. That's one of the theories, but this chapter was insane. But we'll see what happens.